So, a fellow asked me a really good question about these paintings. He asked me, how do we know that these are a reliable source for the tattoos? Maybe the artist was just making it up. After all, the portraits are heavily staged, the clothing was famously provided by a theater company to make them look more Indian. Why couldn't the tattoos also be made up? I could provide a couple of answers to this, but the simplest one is that we've got other portraits of them that were taken at the same time, as well as way too many copies of each of these sets of portraits. It was a sensation at the time. Everybody wanted to know about it. Everybody wanted to see the pictures of these Indian kings who'd come to visit the Queen. I want to show some of that off today because I think it's really interesting. Before we get into the good stuff, though, let's look at some of the terrible stuff. So this is a newspaper clipping where they're advertising talking about it. A newspaper artist's been tasked with showing them, but he clearly hasn't seen them, so that he just makes up something from his imagination. This is how an Englishman in 1710 imagines Indian kings. They look like the four wise men from some Bible play. On that subject, here's another newspaper man imagining them in the theater watching Shakespeare. In this newspaper clipping, the artist claims to have copied the famous paintings by Jan Verhelst. It's clear he didn't have his sketchbook when he was copying them. He just sort of looked at them and then tried to remember them when he got back home. It's baffling. Going back to the famous paintings, apparently back in the day, it was fairly common practice when people were sitting for a portrait for a miniaturist to also be in the room painting along. The miniaturist would try and do things quickly, rough and ready, just to make the most of the sitting session. This is the origin of a second line of portraits of these individuals. I've already shown this one. We know that it isn't a direct copy because their clothing and postures are different. We zoom in on the bottom, the artist has cited his sources. This etching was done by B. Lenz Sr. after drawings taken from life by B. Lenz Jr. We've got several of the miniatures that Lenz Jr. made during that sitting session. I found two versions of each of them, except for Hendrick. The better ones are on vellum, the worse ones are on ivory. It's really interesting to me to have multiple versions by the same artist. I also don't think one is a copy of the other because of how different they are, like the position of the ribbons and the cloth and stuff like that. I think he must have just been drawn like Billy-O to try and get as much done during the sitting session as he could. Frustratingly for me, I couldn't find a picture of the vellum version of the Hendrick miniature. I wonder if it still exists. The third set of portraits, I'm not quite sure about the origin. I know they were drawn from life, but I'm not sure if it was at the same sitting session or a different one. Unlike the other two, which were intended as paintings but got turned into engravings and prints later on in their life, these ones were originally intended for printing. Because they were prints, there's a whole bunch of these that have survived in varying degrees of quality. The variability of the press emphasizing different features. The last thing I want to talk about here doesn't really have anything to do with anything, but it's just a set of copies of these prints that I've found interesting. Here we have the original by John Faber, and here we have the copy by Peter Schenk. It's interesting to me that the copy is flipped. Unlike a painting which sort of functions like a camera, a print functions like a mirror. So he's copied a print and then it's been flipped when he did his own print. What I find interesting about these copies, though, is that because they're so similar to the original, it's fascinating to note where they differ in terms of emphasizing certain features, and so on, so on, so on. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you found this at least half as interesting as I did.